Hi, I'm Bob Herbert. Welcome to OpEd.tv. We are faced with yet another term of Trump as president. No one knows what we're really in for, but for those of us who are concerned, what are we most concerned about? Is American-style democracy really imperiled? Are we abandoning the battle against global warming? How far will we roll the clock back on civil rights, women's rights, human rights? And what should any of us be doing about it? I'll talk about this with one of the most insightful observers of the current scene, Eric Alterman. He's an historian, a former longtime media columnist for The Nation magazine, and a CUNY Distinguished Professor of English and Journalism at Brooklyn College. Eric, welcome.
Always a pleasure, Bob.
Thanks for coming in. So I asked in the intro, what are we most concerned about? From your perspective, what is it? We don't have enough time.
No, let me put it this way. There was no secret about who we were electing this time. And yet he still got, what, almost 80 million votes.
Yeah.
What the hell is with this country? Who are these people who knew that who this man was, that he was a criminal, that he was a sexual predator?
He's a liar.
He's a liar, he's a traitor. And he's someone who seriously said, during a debate, they're eating the cats and dogs.
Yeah.
He's a clown.
Yeah.
And most of the people he hangs around with are similar. They're not competent. They're not even serious.
Right.
And a lot of them are criminals. They're coming out of jail to work with him. So what country are we living in? I can't answer that question anymore. But the second question is, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people say they voted for him and they didn't take what they said seriously, and they don't believe the mainstream media, who they think are in the pocket of big whatever. But so many people voted for him having no idea what they were voting for.
Right.
They like this television star. Bad information is crowding out good information. Am I allowed to curse on this show? No?
No, sir.
Okay. I'm glad I asked, because I was going to quote Steve Bannon.
Yes.
Who at the beginning of the first Trump administration said, our strategy is to flood the scene with feces.
Right.
Although he used a four-letter word for feces. And that has turned out to be a remarkably successful technique.
I agree, and you made the point when we were discussing this on the telephone, that we have all these folks who are getting terrible information about what's going on in this country, and they either don't know how or are not interested in finding the right sources of information.
Well, politics has always been sort of a team game. Who's on your team and who's on the other team. That's always been a big part of it. Identity politics, particularly for white people.
Right.
But what the Republican Party, under the control of Trump and the MAGA movement, have successfully done, they didn't do it by themselves. It was happening for a long time. I think it began with Nixon and went into overdrive with Gingrich.
Right.
But Trump really took it to a place none of us could have imagined, is to take actual policy completely out of the equation and just to say, I'm with you, they're against you. And irrelevant to actually what those people are going to do. Like, there was a story in the right corner of my New York Times homepage today about a guy who's getting deported when all of his friends voted for Trump and family. And they're like, I didn't think he meant me, you know? There's, working people, union people, Hispanics with families who are vulnerable, voting for Trump because they don't like people like you and me. They don't like big city liberals. They don't like the media. They don't like people. They don't like educated people. Education is a bad thing in this country now. Our lives are so upside down. It's hard to understand on the one hand. On the other hand, it seems to be happening all over the world.
So you're a professor and you're dealing with these young people.
Yeah.
So you can explain things to them, no matter what the course is that you're teaching. It comes back to civics and it comes back to current events and that sort of thing. But they are young. Where are they naturally getting their information? And how much of what they're getting do you think they really understand?
You know,
And these are kids in a privileged position compared to just in general.
well, it's Brooklyn College.
Yeah,
New York
but
City.
it's Brooklyn
They went to
College
New York
with
City
Eric
High School.
Alterman as your
They're
professor.
New York City high school students, 40% of New York City high school students are college ready, and a lot of them are going to
Right.
private colleges. I have kids who are striving because they're going to college, and I have some great students, but they have families and they have all kinds of economic struggles that I have trouble even imagining, and I admire them for it. I tell them on the first day of class that I'm only really trying to teach them one thing. I don't expect them to remember many of the facts they learned in my class, but I want them to learn critical thinking. I want them to know the source of whatever knowledge they think that they have is. I do this little lecture where I move around the room because I have a spectrum of the quality of sources, starting with something you heard on a bus, you know, or the internet without any source, going all the way to peer-reviewed journals, and the New Yorker. New Yorker's remarkably well fact-checked. And I beat that into them every week. And I have to say, I meet with very mixed success. Even my graduate students, they really don't respond to this idea that you need to critique the quality of your sources.
Wow.
They get information and they accept it. So I don't know what other professors do. I mean, I'm a historian, so I care a lot about sources, and I like footnotes. And I like sources that have a reputation for caring about accuracy. But young people, man, they don't know where they heard what they heard, but they believe it because it's consistent with their worldview.
What is it that we need to be doing? Where do we start if anybody wants to begin to correct this idea of where you get your information from? So if you start with journalism, where do you start? What do we need to be doing about journalism at this point?
Well, I think our elites have become increasingly irresponsible. It used to be that elites thought themselves to be gatekeepers, and there were a lot of problems with that. They made an awful lot of terrible mistakes that did terrible damage to this country. But they narrowed the scope of what it was responsible to say or believe.
Explain who you mean by elites, because I think some viewers are not going to know what kind of mistakes
What I
you're
mean
talking about.
by elites are the people who felt a responsibility to the institutions that are important to the governance of this country. People who went back and forth from law firms to government positions, people who work for the top networks and newspapers and news weeklies, and they sort of had a shared understanding of the world.
And this is who we were reading and listening to primarily when we were growing up.
You were one of them at the New York Times.
No. Before that, it was,
Yes, before that.
Yeah.
These were, Walter Lippmann wrote a book about this, or a few, but these are the people who created the pictures in our heads from the world outside. Okay, and today, three things have happened. One is that the elites were bought off by money in many respects. The people who used to go into government from law firms now make so much money they don't want to go into government. And if they do go into government, it might not be as clean as it used to be. But secondly, because the mainstream media has been under attack by the creation of the internet, and the internet doesn't have gatekeepers of any kind, bad information has come to be seen as just as valuable and important as good information.
No distinction is made.
So even the New York Times during this election will write about, there's two views of America out there. There's this view and there's that view. And one of them is largely true and one of them is entirely false, but they won't say that. They want to show respect for people who are on the basis of bad information. And so they're not playing the role that they have traditionally played. And because the mainstream media has grown so weak, because they don't have the economic model that they used to have. These other forces, Joe Rogan, now Tucker Carlson, and other podcasters you and I have never heard of but have enormous audiences, they don't care at all. They don't care at all. I mean, if you look today, we're all reading about these drones that are either from Iran or from space, you know, and it's treated as if it's a legitimate problem instead of like it's the kind of thing you used to hear people being communicated through their teeth on
We were
Broadway.
talking about it just before the start of this program. It's silliness. It's like, are you kidding? And I'm originally from New Jersey. I'm like, will you stop, please? But anyway.
It's just like they're eating the cats and dogs.
Yes.
And you know, they're eating the cats and dogs. That was the only presidential debate that was fact-checked. So that one, he didn't quite get away with. But after, both on CNN when Biden and Trump debated, and then the later one, the last one,
I can't remember.
no fact-checking at all. So
I do remember that they weren't going to fact check. It's like,
right. So it's
excuse
just an invitation to lie.
What's the point?
And the Democrats are living in a old world model. They think that they will, first of all, they care about governance, which is complicated and difficult and requires concessions. But they expect the mainstream media to make their case for them.
Right.
And the Republicans don't care at all. And they just say whatever they want. And they might get called on it on the op-ed page.
But there's no consequences.
No, none at all. None at all.
Right. So if you had the power to begin to turn this around, to fix it, what's something you would do? Is there anything, or is it hopeless?
At every turn in every institution, beginning with school, but not just school, I would want to say to people, how do you know what you just said? What is your evidence? I tell my students, I don't care about your opinions. I want arguments based on evidence.
Right.
And I want to know where the evidence comes from. And in the days, newspapers we don't have that many newspapers anymore, but they used to care about their reputations for accuracy. There's a wonderful moment in the movie The Paper, which I think I've mentioned to you before, where the Michael Keaton character, who's an editor, is fighting with the publisher because they're about to publish something they've learned that late in the day that is untrue. And she's saying, we convict them today, we'll exonerate them tomorrow. That's our motto. She's talking about a Daily News, post-type newspaper. And he says, we've never, ever published anything we knew wasn't true.
Right.
And then he gets to yell, stop the presses. So that's gone now. I mean, Fox News, I think, bears a great deal of responsibility for destroying that line of saying things they know are not true. But I was hired by MSNBC when it first began. I was on there the day it began, and I was on there for 2 years, and they were trying to save money by having young people, I was young in those days, just discuss the news. They called us the Friends. And they would have us discuss topics we knew nothing about. And sometimes at a commercial break, they would say, we just heard this, and I want you to discuss it. And I said, because I said, how do we know that's true?
Right.
And they said, we don't know it's true, we know it's out there.
So we can discuss it.
Yeah, out there has become
out there, right.
Yeah, good enough.
Well, one of the problems now is that...
That was 1996, by the way.
Right, and you're talking about the internet now with no boundaries.
Yeah.
In the old days, let's say when we go all the way back to our childhood, I'm older than you are, but go all the way back to our childhood.
Officer Joe Bolton.
I remember. So you had the elites, and you only had the three networks on television for the national and international news, for example, and so that's who you heard, and people read the Times and the Washington Post, but they also had local newspapers, but most local newspapers tried to be responsible in their journalism. So what you didn't hear from everybody in the United States. Maybe the population at that time was 180 million people. You didn't hear from all of them. You didn't hear from the guy down the street, or you didn't hear from the maiden aunt in Dubuque with her opinion or whatever. Now the population is, almost doubled, maybe it's doubled, and now you hear from everybody. And it's just din. And who do you pay attention to? Who do you believe? We shouldn't be taking in all of this information. We should say, this is not a person I need to listen to about this subject. If you want to tell me about baking cakes, fine, I'll listen to you about baking cakes. Don't talk to me about politics.
Yeah, well,
I now see anchors on television who it is, some of them I know, but who it is so clear that they're reading a teleprompter and they have no idea what the heck they're talking about, what they're reading. They didn't report on what they're reading on the teleprompter. And I don't know how to fix that. That's why I said to you, maybe it can't be fixed. We hear from everybody.
Oh, I don't think it can be fixed. Right before the election, I had dinner with 4 friends, all of whom are fancy writers and editors and journalists. And we went around the table saying, what likelihood did we think Trump was going to be elected? And everyone except me said at least 50%. Some people said 60%. And I said 0%. I can't believe I live in a country where this clown could be elected president. So I live in a bubble. Now, I think most people live in bubbles today, different kinds of bubbles. I don't think we have a country anymore in the sense of a shared idea of what it means to be an American. A professor I had named Benedict Anderson once wrote a book called Imagine Communities. And he likened the front page of the New York Times to a tribal drum. And he said, look at the front page of the New York Times. What do these stories have in common? And if you think about it, they don't really have anything in common. There'll be a story about baking on the front page, and there'll be an international story. There'll be a story about New York and Absolute Bagels shutting down, a crisis in my life. And the only thing they have in common is that 1 million people are all reading the same story that day. And again, getting what Walter Lippmann called the same picture in their heads of the world outside. We don't have that anymore.
Right.
We don't have that anymore. So now everybody's getting completely different pictures of the world in their heads, and they're inconsistent with one another.
And many are belligerent about it because they assume that they're right, or that their opinion matters, or whatever.
Right. Well, in the olden days, the so-called good old days we're talking about, there was a lot of condescension towards normal people. In the barbershops in the South, those people, they voted their racism. They still do in a lot of ways. I think in most ways, but they also were voting their anger at the people who were telling them that they were stupid and didn't matter, and now they're in control of things, because Trump and the Republican Party are saying, we're on your side. We don't care. We're not judging you at all. If this is what you believe, that's fine with us.
Well, a free and responsible press is intimately intertwined with government, with the kind of government that or with a government that claims to be a democracy. And you can't have a functioning democracy without, I know it's a cliche, but it's true, without an informed electorate. Now we have the press clearly in trouble for all the reasons that you're saying, and we also have our American-style democracy in trouble. If the press can't be fixed, I'm not sure I can see a way that democracy can be fixed. So my question for you is, how much trouble? This is a republic, a representative democracy. We elect representatives. Supposedly will carry out the wishes of the people who voted them in. So how much trouble is this representative democracy in at the moment? And the reason I ask the question that way is because I wake up every morning and I see people all around me, and I see people on television who don't really seem that concerned about anything. They're just going about their lives, and I begin to wonder if I'm a lunatic here. How much trouble are we in terms of a representative democracy?
Most of my books are about this problem and raising alarm bells back what now look like the good old days. I don't see how we can have fair and honest elections in the future for the following reason. The Trump administration has made it very clear they're going to go after anyone who opposes them in any position, particularly in the media.
Yep.
Donald Trump himself has said he wants to sue the woman at the Des Moines Register who put out a poll that turned out to be false.
Yep.
Now, and ABC and the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times are leading the pack in bowing down to Trump and saying, okay, and Joe and Mika on MSNBC.
Yep.
They're all saying, okay, we get it. We were out of touch. We're sorry. You tell us what's okay, and we'll go along with it. ABC paid $15 million for that privilege. So 4 years of that, 4 years of anticipatory obedience, coupled with the threat that you don't need to actually punish people.
That's
you just need to have them think they're going to be.
Which is why the CEOs are lining up to go to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah.
They haven't been threatened yet.
So 4 years of oppression, coupled with the threat of oppression, will get an awful lot of news stories never written and never discussed, and you only have to do it a few times. So we're going to have 4 years of these institutions having a very, very narrow interpretation of what they think is responsible to report, because they don't want to face the intimidation of Trump and the FBI and the Justice Department and whoever else he puts in there. And plus, the electoral people will be filled with with dishonest people who believe that the last election was stolen.
And then you combine that with what the Republicans have been doing for years now, the voter suppression and intimidation, the extreme gerrymandering. I mean, they are consciously dismantling the foundations of democracy.
Yeah, it's so interesting how we had what they think is an honest election this time and a false one the last time, when everything was pretty much the same. But I read yesterday that this election was decided in 3 states by 220,000 votes.
Right.
If they had gone the other way, she would have won.
Well, then it gets me to, and we've got, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes left. It gets me to the idea of what should the Democrats be doing at this point, and what can ordinary people do? In other words, if you really don't want to say it's all over, pull down the curtain, we're done. If you say, I really do love this country and I want to save it, what should the Democrats be doing, and what can ordinary people do?
If I knew that answer, I would be a rich political consultant. But what I think the Democrats have to do, and what Harris didn't do at all, is fight back on the issues that you're getting beaten up on. So there were 2 people in all of America who got operations in prison to have their sex changed.
Right.
2 people.
And that became like this enormous
$60 million campaign on that. Yeah. So, and Harris did not respond. Did not respond. The same way John Kerry never responded on the Vietnam vet issue.
The Swift boat attacks.
Democrats think it's beneath them to fight back. And they go low, we go high. No, not anymore.
Right.
So that's the first thing I would do. I would fight. I would only support people in positions of I would only hire consultants and party hacks, so to speak. I don't say that derogatorily, who want to fight. I would forget about your friends on the op-ed pages and the editorial pages. That's not who's going to decide elections anymore.
Right, absolutely not. I couldn't agree more, right? So, and then what about ordinary people? You're just talking to people.
They want people who are going to fight for them. That's the point.
But I think about what happened in the early days of the labor movement, in the early days of the civil rights movement, when it seemed like it was impossible to win anything. I think about the women's movement and the gay rights movement, and these were grassroots movement of ordinary people. They weren't government officials. They weren't op-ed writers. But I don't see any of that going on now.
Well, those movements grew organically. You can't fake them. They can't be done from the top down. Civil rights movement, as you well know, grew out of the churches. The women's movement, suburban housewives read Betty Friedan and formed their own groups. The anti-war movement of those days, they had an actual war. It's not up to us. It's up to us to, I guess, one thing that we could do is respect those movements more than we have as elites, because that's where the power is going to come from. It doesn't. I've spent my life writing columns about the media, trying to influence the elites to do a better job, embarrass them if necessary, praise them on those rare occasions when it was merited. But I find that has no power.
I did the same thing and came to the same conclusions, sadly, Well, we're going to have to stop there. We call you in to give it to us straight, and that's what you do, Eric Alterman. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And I'm Bob Herbert. Thank you for watching. See you next time. CUNY TV now has an app. Downloading the CUNY TV app lets you join us anytime from anywhere.